Welcome back to the Pastor's Roundtable. It is good to be back with you. Lord willing, we are on the other side of the halfway mark of this thing. And so we thought it'd be a good time to invite you into a conversation we are having as pastors and other members of our congregation who are helping us think through this really challenging season of church life. And so first, let me just kind of back up and tell you about how we've gotten to this place. Back on March 11th, when we first learned we may or may not be meeting the next Sunday, we thought we need some help to sort through this. Who knows what's going on? And so we reached out to several in our congregation. Richard Kaywood, who's the assistant administrator at Roanoke County, and he deals with these kinds of things all the time. And 4 physicians who you know here from the Cave, Doctors Iglesias and Keggy and Delaney and Robinson. And our pastors, and we put together a little task force, a little what we call the COVID Advisory Council, and that's been a super helpful group because that first week we had to figure out, do we meet Sunday or not? And here we are 7 Sundays later. So we thought it'd be a good time to kind of catch you up on where we are, what's happening, and so we've gathered together to talk a little bit more about that. So first things first, though, we don't want to focus on necessarily the COVID thing so much as what is the Lord teaching us right now. So I'm going to ask, guys, just let's reflect. What is God teaching us these days? Carrie, you want to start us off?
One of the things that I would really be concerned about is us moving from this and start talking about regathering as a church corporately before we really stop to say, what have we learned? This may be the most significant, and maybe most significant is too strong, but at least a very significant opportunity for the church, the bride of Christ, to reflect the love of Christ to the world around us. And that's one of the questions that I have been kind of just wrestling with, is how have I done that with this social distancing and mask on when you walk into Lowe's? How am I reflecting the love of Christ to those around me, those I bump into with elbows? So I didn't know if y'all had any thoughts on that, or if y'all have asked yourselves that question. How are we doing reflecting the love of Christ?
Yeah, because I think our first reaction is, well, we can't help people right now. We can't serve one another right now. That's just not true.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easy just to want to jump into the kind of complaining that we hear around us, like, can't believe this is going on so long. I can't believe we haven't opened back up. I can't believe all these restrictions. And that's not helpful for us as believers to, we don't acknowledge there's difficulties, right? But we have a different hope that some of our neighbors do.
Yeah.
Speaking of neighbors, I think it's been a great opportunity to get to know a lot of neighbors. So folks that we just used to drive by, now we're walking with in the neighborhood and just to meet people for the first time.
That's good.
Yeah, I also think when you reach out to neighbors, people you haven't met or didn't really know well, it's important to try to be creative. Creative in how are we reflecting the love of Christ? How are we reflecting compassion? How are we reflecting mourning with them when they've lost loved ones, longing for one another? There's a number of spiritual disciplines that we also want to be sure we're being creative in exercising. Things like contentment and gratitude rather than complaining. Generosity and peace. How do we reflect that to a neighbor we don't really know well? Because those are important things to reflect if we're going to be ambassadors for Christ.
Yeah, and how do we do this in our own homes, which can be really, a moment ago, Richard, you said, I asked you, what are you learning? And you said,
Patience,
and more patience. I feel that way at our house, and I think the Lord, we just can't, it can't be, man, we need to get out of this moment so then we can be like Jesus.
Yeah, we often want to do that. When we're in a trial, we want out.
Just speed through it.
Yeah.
And we need to slow down and make sure we've learned what we need to learn.
What was
difficulty?
one of the other physicians that you were talking with, talk about
Yeah,
this
a
more.
couple of physicians actually said that they have really reflected on the fact that we are social creatures. We need to live in relationship.
Yeah.
And sometimes the pace of a medical profession, the pace of learning, the pace of responsibilities just kind of washes over that role of having relationships. And he said it's really been helpful for him to stop and just say, I'm a relational creature.
Yeah.
We're going to have a fulfilled life. I need to live in relationship
Good.
with people.
Yeah, we're just seeing a longing for community, I think unlike we've ever seen in a season of church life than we are right now. And I would have never guessed that, if you'd have told me 2 months ago, we're going to go into a period of social isolation, but it's going to be a time where community life in the church is going to be growing. I would have never thought that would be the case.
Yeah.
And yet, we're just seeing it happen all around us. And it's really, really encouraging.
Yeah. I've taught on the Christian one another's, and this was eye-opening that there's a Christian one another I've never thought about. And that's that longing for one another.
Yeah.
That you see in the Apostle Paul's letters. And I think that's a real entity, because a Christian one another. Yeah.
What else are you learning during this time before we shift to some of the more technical things? Anything else you want to put on the table that you're learning, that the Lord is teaching? One of the things, I'll throw one other thing on the table. The Lord is reminding me the church is so much more. In fact, the church is not the buildings. It's not the facility. It really is the people of God. Has that hit anybody else during this time? Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly we have transitioned to a new way of being church that doesn't really involve a building.
Yeah.
And it really just underscores what you said, that the church is not the building, it is the people. And we're seeing that happen.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think for me, one thing that I've really reflected on is it really draws into contrast, or maybe highlights how self-centered we normally tend to be. Because what we really want is we want our lives to go back to normal, and our lives defined by our terms. We want to do what we want to do the way we used to do it.
Yeah.
And there's all these external factors that are interfering with that, and quite frankly, the ones in your home, because everything is different. And it's really a very selfish thing, but it's kind of the way we normally tend to live. And
Yeah.
so I know that I've struggled some with just, how do I live in this whole new world in a way that reflects Christ and is good for my family and good for my employer, with all of these things swirling around that are outside of my control. So you don't have a normal schedule, you just don't do the normal activities, you really want to go out to eat, you really want to go see someone. And I think after this, hopefully all of us will look at life a little bit differently. It's a little bit less about us.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more about other people. And we just adapt to a new normal that's hopefully a little better.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. And we can all thank God that Chick-fil-A is still open.
Yeah.
So,
We just want to go inside.
yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's shift to this second group of questions, which is, Richard, this is the world you work in. Can you bring us up to speed on what we're thinking, what local government officials are thinking about where we are and how things are going?
Sure. And I think when you start with that, you kind of have to start at the national level and work your way down a little bit. I think many of us have been keeping a close eye on some of the information coming out of the White House. But really in Virginia, what really matters to us and how we live our daily lives is what's happening at the state level. So all of the closures that have taken place for the most part have been directed by the governor's office. And so at the local government level, we watch the governor, we watch every one of his press conferences very closely, because that's where the new things that we will have to do are going to come from. It is good to see that, at least from what we see so far, that the governor has been mirroring the language that's being used by the White House with the idea of the 3 phases to reopening. At present, the governor doesn't feel like we've quite reached that point yet. There's some trends that are kind of running counter to each other right now. So we have some reductions in cases, but hospitalizations are kind of remaining stable. So we don't really know at this point where they are in the countdown to phase 1. But I think what's really important from the perspective of church life and even community life with the reopening is that everything I have looked at is consistent in one area, and that is that there will be this fairly long-term need to be very protective of the people who are most vulnerable to the disease.
Okay.
So both phase 1 and phase 2 have some very strong guidance toward people who are very vulnerable, which would primarily be older people and folks with underlying health conditions. And even phase 3 still has some of that direction. We're looking at that as an employer because we are a large employer. How do we take care of the folks that work for the county as we start to maybe reopen things? But I think that'll be important in the church and in the larger community too. So there's likely to be this kind of in-between world where some of us are doing some things, but not everybody is doing everything. And how do you protect your neighbor who may be more vulnerable as you do that?
Good, good. Any follow-ups for Richard on that? Come to
I
mind?
wonder how that's going to look in church life when we want to welcome, a senior church member and friend, and yet we also want to protect them. And that's going to be a tough balance.
I think that's going to be one of the greatest challenges that everyone will face because I know a lot of our more vulnerable folks feel very isolated, and they probably have some of the strongest need to want to come out of that isolation. And I don't know that anyone has really answered that question yet. The guidance, at least at the national level, is fairly general in nature. We may see some more specific information come from the state because what they've done so far has been more detailed. But I do think that'll be a real challenge for everyone. How do you have this kind of split world, and what does that look like?
Yeah.
So Richard, the next stage is phase 1. What has the government defined as to some markers for that? What will it look like?
So at the state level, what they're looking for, and again, they have not announced they've seen this yet. They're looking for a downward trend in positive cases and really rate of positive cases, which is also important. So I think right now around 11 to 12% of the tests taken in Virginia come back positive. They want to see that number declining through time, which would indicate less prevalence. And then fewer hospitalizations. And then the other two things the governor is really focused on is availability of the PPE and then making sure that there's enough hospital resources in the state, which so far has not been a big problem. Another thing the governor introduced at his last news conference that I think is important for us is, for the most part, he's kind of given this idea that we're all one Virginia and we'll all do the same thing. But at his most recent press conference, he started talking about the idea, well, maybe that's not how we need to move forward. Maybe the western part of the state, where there's been a lower incidence, might go on a different schedule than the more urban part of the state where they do have more prevalence of the disease.
Makes sense.
That's very hopeful for us because while we certainly have cases in the Roanoke Valley, we look very little like the Richmond area or Northern Virginia area. So that could help us get started more quickly. The one specific example he gave that I thought was very interesting is the city of Bristol, which is half in Tennessee and half in Virginia. And he feels like he and the governor of Tennessee need to work very closely so this larger city of Bristol across both states could do something together.
Yeah. Good.
When they're looking at rates of positive cases, there's almost a comparing apples to oranges, because early on, only the sickest people got the test and testing for it. And now that it's a little bit more prevalent, there's a little bit more testing being done. And hopefully that's going to change in the next week or two, or even more of that. So it's a little tough to look at rates if you're comparing early on to now with the frequency that those testing could be done.
I would agree. And I think the governor's target, if I remember correctly, is they want to be able to have the capacity to do around 10,000 tests a day. And I think we're right now a little less than half of that. So if you're testing at that rate and your rate of positives went up, that would be a very negative sign because you're testing more people and a larger percentage would be positive. So hopefully those trends would go together. As you test more and more, you would find fewer positive cases. I know another really significant focus of the governor's office has been our assisted living facilities and senior centers and trying to contain or avoid outbreaks in those. And a lot of our testing resources right now are really focused at those populations and first responders. They have a desire to move it more out to the general population, which would give a much better idea. In the Roanoke Valley, for example, how many people really have this, because the tests have been so concentrated on a fairly small number of people.
Carrie, the other physician's unable to join us today, but you guys are talking. What's your sense of how the medical community is doing in terms of, disposition and well-being, those who are providing care here in the Valley?
I think they're doing well. I think they're doing well. Number one, the Roanoke Valley really has not been hammered like some of the other communities and cities. So they're doing well with that. There's financial struggles. There's social struggles. There's disappointments that they have to field when elective surgeries aren't done. There's some isolation that they feel when they come in contact with a patient, and now they've got to separate from their family for a little bit. And those can be tough times. But I think in general, from talking to the three other physicians on this council, they really are doing quite well and have actually learned some things that they think has been helpful to them.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So they're doing very well.
Let's shift gears a little bit and think about, I think most of our people are now starting to ask the question, all right, if we get a chance to start worshiping again in June, whether it's June 14th or June 21st or June 28th, Lord willing, it'll be sometime in June. What would it look like for us to start gathering again here on the church campus in a worship service with 150, 200 people in it? What are some of the things we want to, we're thinking about things like multiple services, obviously, spacing those apart appropriately, simplifying our worship context. We would not start with the choir would probably not be able to meet. Bible study classes probably would not be wise to do that either. Things like that. So what are some other things that you guys have in mind about how we would take precautions and wisely step back into this and worship again? So thoughts on that?
I think one thing we've talked about is, how do we practice social distancing in those early phases when we're coming back together? And so maybe we're sitting on every other pew and spreading out on the pews. Maybe we're not passing an offering plate where you're physically touching something and handing it on to the person. Our greeting time would look different in that season as well. So how we practice the Lord's Supper would probably look different as well.
Yeah.
We may even have a separate entrance for those coming in and use another access point for the exit, have a little wider gap between services, so that the first service doesn't wait around and visit with everybody, because then we've got a whole lot more people.
We don't want to tempt people.
Commingling, that's right.
Tempt people to do that.
Yeah.
So traffic flow might move in a direction and not.
That may be something that's helpful.
Some of our people will choose not to step back in. I think some of those who are more vulnerable wisely would choose not to step back in right when we first begin to gather. So that might make our groups smaller.
Yeah.
Good. Any other thoughts about things we would do as we start to gather again?
Well, I think you just hit on a good point. We would want to make the environment as welcoming as possible to folks who want to come, but also make it equally welcoming if you would feel better to stay at home because you need to, and not make anybody feel pressure to come, so have it work both ways. Another thing we may want to think about is, is it going to be common for folks to be wearing a mask? Some people have done that on their own volition. Some people haven't, but the more people you bring together in a reasonably small space, probably the more valuable it would be to have those. And I think a number of things like that we'd want to think through. I do think what we're seeing in the phases, there's likely to be a number associated with. So right now, the governor's limit is 10.
Right.
My assumption is the first increment he will go to is likely to be 50, because you'll see 50 in a lot of the guidance. So there's likely to be a stair step of assembly size that's deemed to be appropriate. So I would assume we would probably follow in that same pattern as we see information come out from the federal and state government.
Now you brought up a good point, because we've talked as a group about not gathering back in large context until we get beyond that 50 number and get released to large gatherings. Is that still kind of the thinking that we've had at the table?
I think it's just going to be something we're going to have to watch because we don't know exactly what that'll look like from the governor's office, whether it'll be, does it go from 50 to 100 or 50 to 250?
Right.
I do know that the very last thing I think to happen is going to be something like an NCAA basketball tournament game where you have 20,000 people in an arena,
Yeah.
but that's very different than what we do with church service. So we're somewhere in the middle of that spectrum between
Yes.
10 and thousands, and we'll just have to, I think, be very cognizant of where those are, because I don't think we would probably want to be in a situation where we were kind of at the overstepping where the official line
That's right,
lies.
exactly. Richard, I really like what you said about us thinking well about those who may not be comfortable gathering back with us when we worship. So we want to make sure we're making available online and virtual, some continuity for them. They can continue to watch and see what's happening here. That hopefully will increase their comfort level as well as, meet their immediate need to be virtually gathered with us. So we don't want to forget about them.
Yeah, and I think as well, we want to, our CRT may continue to function to reach out to those who are more at risk during this initial phase as we begin to gather back together. Our Zoom groups through Zoom Bible study and community groups may still continue to function in that way for a while as we make this transition. So, we're not going to just say, okay, you just watch online, but we have nothing else to do with you.
Right.
We're going to continue to be community and practice community.
That's good. That's good. Richard, thanks for all the time that you have invested in our think tank and for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Pete, and I just want to share that I really appreciate the opportunity, but I certainly don't feel like I'm the expert in any of this stuff. I would encourage folks to look both at the White House website and the Governor of Virginia website if you'd like to review some of the materials that we talked about today, and they're updated daily. So it just may be a good idea to follow along, particularly as you hear things starting around in the media. You can get a lot more detail and richness probably from
Good.
what you could find online. And if anybody has any questions at the local level, feel free to reach out to me.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So through the magic of television, we now have Pastor Chip and Pastor Chuck with us.
Hello.
And so welcome to you guys. How we doing?
Doing good?
Good.
Doing
Yeah. So we talked in the first segment about what we're learning, what the Lord is teaching us personally. How are you guys doing? What's the Lord teaching you these days in the midst of the season of exile here?
I think what I am learning is just what is important in church life. We've been talking a lot about intergenerational ministry, and now we're seeing things happen. We've been talking about families and the value of families worshiping together, and now what choice do we have but to gather in our homes to worship, and we're learning. And so I think as things have been stripped away, this is we're learning what's most important in life and faith and in church life particularly.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Pastor Chuck, what do you?
Yeah, those are good reflections. I think I would also say just you're just slowing down the pace. Maybe two things: slowing down pace and just the relational aspect of Christian living. This past Sunday we gathered with another family. They were in their lawn chairs in our front yard, and we were in
Nice.
ours. And that's not something we do every Sunday afternoon. We gathered as a church on the morning, but this afternoon we did that, and we spent a good bit of time just getting updated and really having conversations that we would not have otherwise had.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I've been encouraged just as I've seen church members step up to serve in different ways. We've got this CRT group that's serving those that are most vulnerable, but even just some other ways. We've seen people serve on the property. We've got a team that's mowing the grass now. I got a team doing some maintenance projects around here. That's just really encouraging, and also serving their neighbors, those outside of the church. Just seeing the value of service in this season has been really encouraging.
Yeah, that's good. I think I originally said, what's it going to be like when we get back to this, back to normal? And honestly, I don't think we want to go back to normal. I mean, normal is not necessarily good.
Right.
I think the Lord is giving us some new wineskins these days, and we need to think well about how to cherish and grow and learn some stuff during this season. So,
Good.
yeah. So, all right, transition then to, we talked in the first segment about what it looks like to come back to the worship gathering. Let's talk a little bit about Bible study classes and community groups. And what do you see happening between now and our ability to gather sometime in the month of June, hopefully? Pastor Allen, what do you think is, talk to us a little bit about Bible study classes and
Yeah, and I
community
think
groups.
before you even try to answer that question, which we do want to answer, I'm just really encouraged by what is going on right now in our Bible study classes and in our community groups. We are seeing people involved in a way that we didn't even see prior to this. And just things that, were people maybe that were more on the fringe before of a class or a community group, stepping back in. We're even seeing some of our community groups growing in this season. We're seeing new community groups starting over Zoom in this season. Chip, you've been working with one of our senior adult Bible study classes, getting them using technology they've never used and could imagine using before, and they're not only doing it, they're excited about it.
Yeah, I am so proud of our senior adults who are stepping into this. I hear from several people every week who are, they're entering into a brave new world, a whole new world, and they're enjoying it, and the gospel is going forth, and God's word is being taught in new ways, and it's pretty amazing. So
Yeah, this week you've got the high school boys virtual groups developing, I think.
Yeah.
Right? So that didn't happen 3 weeks ago.
Right,
This is just, we're still figuring this out.
Yeah, high school guys usually virtually talk through video games. Now we're talking
Right,
other ways,
right,
and so
right.
we're expanding their ability to communicate with one another. So, yeah.
So, Chip, we've been thinking about this transition from where we are now, doing stuff primarily virtually, to what's the in-between stage before we actually are meeting back in the building, in our classrooms, or back in homes as a community group? What might that intermediate stage look like for us?
We're really hopeful that that we can begin to meet in person, maybe outside on the church grounds in a socially distant way. But we long to be together. We want to be together. And as these phases continue, and in the weeks ahead, we want to help our Bible study classes and community groups to begin to gather together. Even before maybe we could worship together, we want to allow groups to do that and encourage that, not just allow that. We want to encourage those participating together.
Yeah, so if we get the green light from government officials that we can gather beyond groups of 10,
Yes.
we want to use that season as best as we can to encourage groups and Bible study classes creatively, and we'll try to give some more direction to that in the weeks to come, what that looks like, but we are definitely thinking through that and wanting to encourage it as much as possible, so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, church life is going to continue to go on, and I think what we're seeing is that we are trying to be creative, and groups and classes are being creative. I'm really excited. In a couple weeks, we're going to honor our high school graduates. This has been an interesting season for them. So much has changed in terms of their graduation. So we want to be creative as a church and drive by and celebrate and honor them. So stay tuned for what that looks like. But this is the opportunity for us to press in and really value these relationships that we know and love in church life.
Let's talk more about that day. Is it May 17th?
May 17th.
You think it's going to be on a Sunday night?
Yeah, Sunday night we're gonna gather them in the lower lot, and then our church is gonna gather and then drive by, honking horns and cheering them on and celebrating our graduates. We've got 9 graduates who are this is an accomplishment for them, and we like to publicly celebrate them.
Yeah.
This is a little different, so we're gonna enjoy that. So
Is there a
join us.
limit on the number of cars that we're allowed to do a drive-by on? Do we know about this?
Yeah, I think we're
You think we're okay?
As long as we stay in our cars, it can
Stay
be,
in line?
Richard.
Don't get out of your car.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
So one of the things we like about these drive-bys, like recognizing our graduates or someone's birthday, which we've experienced several of these, is we get to go honor those people, and we also get to see one another,
Right.
which has been really refreshing. So I'm looking forward to Sunday night, May 17th.
It's gonna be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be
It'll be
fun.
fine. Yeah.
I think we're also seeing people stepping into church life. We've had a response. People are interested in baptism, which is amazing during this time, and even joining in our church. And so even though we are scattered, the Lord is at work bringing people to our body and to faith in Christ.
Amen.
Yeah. And so as part of that, our membership process continues, and we've got meaningful membership class going on. And if you are interested in joining the church, you don't need to wait until we're gathering together back publicly.
Good.
You can join in this season. We're going to figure out how to do that.
Yeah. And we've got a member meeting coming up. That is May 31st.
May 31st.
Hopefully a Sunday night, May 31st, a live Zoom member meeting. We're going to try to Zoom everybody in for that meeting. Chuck, tell us about what's
Yeah.
happening there.
We don't know what that's going to look like exactly as far as live and Zoom, but we're going to try to make it personal and fun. And we certainly will have some items we want to cover. We want to come back to the church with serve teams, think through that a little bit. Our nominating committee. We also want to talk about our finances and facilities, some updates and things in those areas. So those are kind of normal member meeting items
Good.
that we'll want to address. I think I just want to pause and just say, thank you, church, for your faithful giving. I think that's something we've all been encouraged by. Your notes, your giving. Really, we've seen your sacrifice. And so I would really say thank you for that. And we'll talk more about that May 31st, but we've been encouraged, so thank you for that.
All right, so that is what is going on at the cave, and hopefully this roundtable is helpful to you. If you have further questions or comments or interests about things you want us to talk about, we're going to do this roundtable probably every couple of weeks or so, maybe every 2 or 3 weeks, and just keep you posted on where we are with what's happening and when we're going to gather again and all those things. Pastors Chuck and Chip, thank you guys for joining us through the magic of television. Yeah.
Glad to do
And
it.
we'll see you next time.